but then they do start to produce a more functional protein. And so therefore, you basically delay the muscle weakness from happening. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's perfect. Yeah, I think yeah, and I'll just emphasize a couple of points you raised, which I unfortunately had to gloss over a little bit in the main presentation. But the dystrophin gene is gigantic, and the AAV virus is unfortunately kind of small. The smallness is good because it's less immunogenic, but it means you can only put so much DNA in it. And so over the years, various scientists have been testing different truncated forms of this gene. And there are several that are used in these different AAV therapies, and one has been approved now, and there are others in clinical trials. And so we've identified the most functional segments of dystrophin. So we deliver just a small part of the gene, but it's what we believe are the most important parts. The one thing about AAV that's very helpful, as you mentioned, is that whatever the payload they deliver does not integrate into the human genome. So there's a big concern about gene therapy is that if the DNA you're delivering integrates into the human genome and accidentally activates an oncogene or disrupts a gene that is necessary for normal function, it could actually end up doing more harm than good. So one of the reasons why AAV is so popular currently as a gene therapy vehicle is that the payload is deposited in the cell, but it doesn't integrate into the human genome. So that's a really big plus about it.
Ah, and so then my question is, does this mean that Duchenne's can be cured?
So the word cure has been a really interesting word that's been discussed in the rare disease community, at least, my window into the rare disease community. And as we all know, since we all treat pediatric patients, a lot of pediatric diseases are rare. So the definition of a cure, I think what patients have been telling me and patient advocacy groups have been saying is that sometimes having the word cure as a short-term goal creates some barriers, because then the bar is so high that treatments that may provide substantial benefit but wouldn't necessarily be defined as a cure would then be bypassed. And so cure is something that ultimately we'd like to get to. And some patients define cure as, it's interesting when you talk to patients, sometimes they will define cure as just having some stability in their clinical course and not having to worry constantly about decline that's happening in the future. That's one of the things that at least some patients have told me is it's what really bothers them, is that thought of the anticipated progression. So with gene therapy, we don't have a lot of long-term data on Duchenne. We don't even have a lot of long-term data on SMA, which was approved a little bit earlier, just because they're still so recent. So we don't know what these patients will look like 20 years from now. It'd be nice if they were completely healthy and didn't require any further therapies. We don't know that yet. And so that's something that that will require a lot of careful study in the future. And I think we should look at what's feasible in terms of next steps. Stabilizing is a good initial goal. And then once we've reached stabilization, can we improve the patient status after that?
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. And so I'm going through some of the Q&As, and so one is, does Medicaid, so the public health insurance, pay for $1 million plus gene therapy?
In a lot of states, Medicaid will. I don't know that I can say that every state does, and and every state, every Medicaid program, I think, has different criteria, as well as other third-party payers. There's, the SMN2 copy number. There are laboratory studies, what the patient looks like. There are these physical functional outcome measures, like the CHOP-INTEND score. For anyone who's seen these patients, you may have heard of this. It's a functional motor outcome scale where you check different things on the baby. Typically, a physical therapist checks these and then comes up with a numerical score, and that can also influence what a Medicaid or another third-party payer will do. I think the payment is significant, and as you can imagine, the significant amount paid for one of these gene therapies could go towards, many doses of another therapy. So that does bring up some ethical questions. I think we're still working through how do we weigh the benefits versus the costs, and what does that mean for society as a whole? Because as more of these therapies get improved, the aggregate cost does become more substantial, and we have to figure out what's most beneficial for as many patients as possible.
So the cost can actually go up. Okay. And I suspect that
Yeah.
part of that also has to do with the cost of the research and all the testing that's associated with the medication or the therapy.
So the research and development, the R&D part, is a significant component of the cost. The manufacturing of the gene therapy is a significant ongoing cost. So, I think it might be feasible in the future for the cost to drop a bit. I think one of the big factors that can help drive that would be to lower manufacturing costs. Generating many, many doses of this tiny virus, and in a way that there's no contamination and it's safe for human administration is a fairly arduous process. And that's one of the bottlenecks, both on the research side and the clinical side, is the intensity and the cost of the manufacturing. So I think that's one of the big factors that could, in the future, drive down the cost, is if the manufacturing becomes more streamlined.
Thank you. So the last question, and this is more about thinking about the future. Which is, what do you predict for neuromuscular diseases in the next half century or so?
In the next half century, I would anticipate most babies, if not all, will be getting some form of genetic testing at birth, and probably with widespread preconceptional testing. Now, costs will have to drop, and we'll need a way to either find a way to interpret this better or automate the process of interpretation. But on the diagnostic side, in 50 years, I fully expect that will be what's happening. In terms of therapies, these AAV therapies will be pretty routine, and may even be supplanted by a newer technology. You never know. There are stem cell therapies being developed. There's all kinds of oligonucleotides. So I think the future is very exciting. There are obviously lots of challenges, but really the past decade has been amazing to watch and to participate in.
Wow. Well, more to come, but thank you so very much.